Hi everyone, and welcome to the Timeless History channel with me, Deric, aka Sal, the Omega Enthusiast. After going through my watches, I thought that while I still have these pieces, I should take this opportunity to create this video, in which I will share the evolution of vintage Omega timepieces through 8 decades, from the 1900s to the 1970s. I will not include pocket watches in this video. I hope you enjoy seeing the transition from decade to decade and consider sharing your opinion at the end in the comment section. So please enjoy. At the beginning of the 20th century, adding a bracelet to a watch was a form of decorative enhancement, mainly for women, with few options for wristwatches made for men. In the early 1900s, men's wristwatches appeared like strap-on pocket watches on the wrist. They were chunky, sensitive to moisture, and not shock-resistant. The cases were mainly made from silver or nickel, and the dial was enamel. For this video, I have this single example that dates to 1900. What I like about this example is the case looks unique and different from a pocket watch design. As we enter a new decade, the 1910s, the slow but incremental advancement of the wristwatch facilitated experimentation with shapes and form. Omega wristwatches diversify the case and dial design for comfort and aesthetic. The classic tonneau or barrel form cases were among the earliest designs, with smooth, slightly curved back that comfortably rests on the wrist. You will notice the dial numerals are enlarged and stretched, while most of these new wristwatches had no second indication. The 1910s was a progressive era, and the decade when World War I occurred was when trench watches became popular. The 1920s were a time of wealth and prosperity, a decade filled with luxury and beautiful timepieces. A watch was no longer just for the pocket, but had been integrated into all forms and objects. One of the most popular style of wristwatch is the cushion case design. It was an era of thickly applied radium watches with attractive cathedral or spade-type hands. I thought I had sold off my 1920s Omega, but luckily I still own this very piece from 1928. Some of the most iconic and attractive vintage watches are from the 1930s. It was a decade when a wristwatch appeared to take shape like the one we know today. The Omega brand offers various designs, but the most attractive pieces are those from the later half of the 1930s. Art Deco, step bezel, and rectangular design are among the most popular in this decade. In 1932, Omega launched its first waterproof wristwatch called the Marine, and in 1937, Omega introduced its first wristwatch with the center second feature, known as the Medicus. I really enjoy wearing watches from this period due to their small size. The 1940s was a decade when wristwatches dominated other types of timekeepers and matured in form and design. It is possibly my favorite decade for collecting vintage timepieces. Just on the Omega brand alone, there are just so many attractive watches to collect. Three very important firsts from Omega were introduced in this decade. The first chronometer wristwatch was introduced in 1941. The first true automatic wristwatch was introduced in 1943. And the first Seamaster was introduced in 1948. The 1940s also produced some of the most intriguing Omega chronographs. Of course, the most attractive and sophisticated Omega of the decade is the Cosmic Moonphase Triple Date. I built a significant collection of vintage Omega from this decade, most of which are powered by the legendary Caliber 30T2 movement. During the mid-1940s, Omega introduced the income block system to all its wrist watches, making them more durable against shock. The 1950s was a decade of innovation and creativities in the Omega watch market. Many new models and countless designs were introduced, such as the Omega Constellation introduced in 1952, the first Seamaster with a calendar feature, and the launch of the 1957 trilogy featuring the Seamaster 300, Railmaster, and Speedmaster. At this point, I've lost count of how many awesome Omegas there are. 2 decades later, I continue to come across new references or design from the 1950s. Not only are the watches attractive, but Omegas from the 1950s are robust, reliable, and accurate wristwatches with class. I highly recommend one from the 1950s if you want to own a classic vintage Omega watch. It was after the 1950s that watches began to appear more modern. Feel free to go through my channel's playlist to view the many examples from different eras of the 20th century. As we entered the decade of the 1960s, Omega began to concentrate its watch design on something more simple and elegant. The most sought-after Omega Constellation, known for its dogleg lugs with a pipe hand dial, was introduced in 1961. Omega movement quality is at its peak throughout this period. This decade's most popular vintage Omega watches are the various Constellation, Seamaster, and Genève models. Most watches will come with the date feature. Wearing a 1960s Omega watch can be mistaken for a modern-day timepiece. It is also the last decade I recommend to anyone looking for a birth year Omega watch. Innovation and craftsmanship have gone downhill as we enter the 1970s, mainly due to the quartz crisis. However, specific models from the 1960s, such as the Seamaster DeVille and the few examples presented in this video, continue to be produced throughout the early half of the 1970s. I would describe the Omegas from this decade as futuristic looking, mostly with low quality movements and cheaply made cases. Those are not in this video. While Omega's was equally as great as Rolex watch during the 1960s, it is no longer in the same league as a Rolex in the 1970s. I understand it will hurt some people, but speaking the truth is better than promoting something untrue. If you find this video interesting, please share it with your watch buddies and give it a thumbs up. If you're new, consider subscribing to the channel and share your thoughts with everyone in the comment section below. As always, I hope you have learned something new. I will continue to produce more content like this for you to watch, so your support for this channel is highly important. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the following episode.